Atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1945. On August 6, 1945, during the final stages of World War II, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb, called Little Boy, on the city of Hiroshima in Japan. The bomb exploded with the force of about 15 kilotons of TNT, causing massive destruction. 70,000 to 80,000 people were killed instantly, with thousands more dying later from radiation sickness and injuries. The city was left in ruins, and the long-term effects of radiation exposure continued to affect survivors for years. Just 3 days later, on August 9, a second bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki, a port city. This bomb was even more powerful, with an explosion of around 21 kilotons of TNT, killing an estimated 40,000 to 75,000 people immediately. Like Hiroshima, many more died from the effects of radiation, and the city's infrastructure was devastated. These bombings marked the first and only time nuclear weapons were used in warfare. They played a key role in Japan's decision to surrender on August 15, 1945, effectively ending World War II. However, the bombings also raised serious ethical questions about the use of such powerful weapons and their lasting impact on both the cities and their people. Today, Hiroshima and Nagasaki stand as symbols of peace and resilience, reminding the world of the devastating power of nuclear weapons and the need for global disarmament. 1815 Tambora volcano eruption. Mount Tambora in Indonesia experienced one of the largest and most destructive volcanic eruptions in history. The eruption was so powerful that it killed an estimated 71,000 people and completely destroyed the surrounding area. The lava, ash, and gases immediately affected areas thousands of kilometers away. But Tambora's impact was not limited to this disaster. The eruption created a large ash cloud in the atmosphere, which blocked out sunlight and caused temperatures to drop worldwide. 1816 became known as the year without a summer. This caused the summer to be unexpectedly cold and wet worldwide. This cooling caused major losses in agriculture and caused global famines and food crises. The eruption was also one of the events that changed the world's climate in the long term. People had to deal with cold, crop failures, and starvation due to the volcanic winter. Tambora's eruption also taught an important lesson about the role of atmospheric gases in the world's climate. This disaster is considered the worst volcanic disaster in history and has inspired discussions about climate change. Mongol Invasions. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century were some of the most significant and destructive military campaigns in world history. Led by Genghis Khan, the Mongols managed to create the largest contiguous empire in history, stretching across Asia, Europe, and parts of the Middle East. The invasions, which began in the early 1200s, dramatically reshaped the political and cultural landscapes of the regions they affected. Genghis Khan, born as Temujin, united the Mongol tribes and forged a formidable military force known for its speed, organization, and ruthlessness. The Mongols employed advanced military tactics, including the use of cavalry archers, psychological warfare, and innovative siege techniques, which made them highly effective in both open field battles and city sieges. The Mongol invasions resulted in the destruction of numerous cities and the deaths of millions. Key targets of the Mongols included the Khwarezmian Empire, the Song dynasty, and large parts of Eastern Europe. The Mongols sacked major cities such as Baghdad, Kiev, and Samarkand, leaving behind widespread devastation. The siege of Baghdad in 1258, for example, marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate and is often cited as one of the greatest acts of destruction in history. Despite the brutality of their invasions, the Mongols also facilitated cultural exchange, trade, and communication between the East and West, laying the foundations for the Silk Road to flourish. They promoted the spread of technologies, ideas, and goods across their vast empire, including gunpowder, printing, and papermaking. In some regions, the Mongols helped rebuild cities, improve infrastructure, and establish systems of governance. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his successors continued his legacy, expanding the empire even further. However, the empire eventually fragmented into several smaller khanates, and by the late 14th century, the Mongol Empire began to decline. Today, the Mongol invasions are remembered as one of the most pivotal events in history, with profound consequences for the development of civilizations, the rise of new empires, and the shaping of the modern world. COVID-19 pandemic. Pandemic, caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus, began in December 2019 in Wuhan, China, and rapidly spread worldwide. It primarily spreads through respiratory droplets and causes symptoms ranging from mild respiratory issues to severe pneumonia. The pandemic overwhelmed healthcare systems globally, especially in its early stages, with hospitals facing critical shortages of supplies and resources. Governments imposed lockdowns and social distancing measures to contain the virus. The pandemic led to severe economic disruptions, with businesses closing, job losses, and recessions worldwide. However, vaccines were developed at an unprecedented pace, and vaccination campaigns began in 2021, offering hope for recovery. The pandemic also caused widespread mental health issues due to isolation and uncertainty. It highlighted significant inequalities in healthcare access and vaccine distribution, especially in low-income countries. While vaccines have helped reduce the spread, new variants continue to pose challenges. COVID-19 has dramatically impacted healthcare, economies, and daily life, emphasizing the need for global cooperation and better preparedness for future health crises. The sinking of the Titanic. On April 15, 1912, the Titanic, one of the largest and most luxurious ships ever built, sank on its maiden voyage after striking an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean. The ship, hailed as unsinkable due to its advanced safety features and design, began to sink within 3 hours of the collision. The impact caused a massive hole in the hull, flooding multiple compartments, which ultimately led to the ship's demise. The Titanic had lifeboats, but there were only enough to accommodate half the passengers aboard, and many lifeboats were launched with empty seats due to panic and confusion. Over 1,500 people perished that night, including both first-class passengers and lower-class emigrants. The tragic event left a lasting mark on history, as it revealed serious flaws in safety protocols, particularly the lack of enough lifeboats and the absence of effective evacuation procedures. The sinking of the Titanic stunned the world and sparked an international outcry. In response, maritime safety regulations were significantly reformed, with the introduction of measures like mandatory lifeboats for all passengers and better emergency preparedness. The Titanic disaster remains one of the deadliest and most well-known maritime tragedies, a stark reminder of the need for caution, safety, and accountability in any field of innovation. The Holocaust, 1941 to 1945. The Holocaust was one of the darkest chapters in human history. It refers to the systematic genocide carried out by Nazi Germany during World War II, with the goal of exterminating the Jewish people, along with other groups such as Romani people, disabled individuals, Polish people, Slavs, LGBTQ+ individuals, and others considered undesirable by the Nazis. The Nazi regime, under Adolf Hitler's leadership, implemented this horrific plan through policies of discrimination, dehumanization, and mass murder. The largest killing centers were established in concentration and extermination camps such as Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor, where millions of people were killed by means of gas chambers, forced labor, starvation, and brutal treatment. It is estimated that 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, along with millions of others. The genocide was carried out with chilling efficiency and cruelty, leaving behind an unimaginable toll of loss and suffering. The Holocaust also represented the culmination of a long history of anti-Semitism and racial ideology propagated by the Nazi regime. The survivors of this atrocity became witnesses to one of humanity's greatest crimes, and their testimonies continue to serve as an important reminder of the dangers of hatred, prejudice, and intolerance. Today, the Holocaust is studied as a means of honoring the memory of the victims, educating future generations about the consequences of hatred, and ensuring such horrors are never repeated. 2. World War. Lasted from 1939 to 1945, was one of the most devastating and extensive wars in history. It affected almost the entire world, causing millions of deaths, widespread destruction, and the reshaping of national borders. The main causes of the war were the expansionist ambitions of Germany's Nazi regime and the unfair terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Adolf Hitler's Germany began the war by invading Poland. This action led to the United Kingdom and France declaring war on Germany. The Axis powers, consisting of Germany, Italy, and Japan, fought against the Allied powers, which included the United Kingdom, France, the Soviet Union, the United States, and China. The war resulted in large-scale conflicts in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Pacific Ocean. Key moments of the war include Hitler's attempt to conquer Europe, the D-Day landings, and major battles such as the Battle of Stalingrad. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were important developments that brought the end of the war. World War II also included one of the most horrific genocides in human history, such as the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were subjected to genocide by the Nazi regime. In addition, more than 70 million people lost their lives in the war. At the end of the war, Germany surrendered and the Nazi regime ended. Japan surrendered after the atomic bombs dropped by America on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. World War II paved the way for the establishment of the United Nations and the beginning of the Cold War. The world was reshaped after the war and led to radical changes in international relations. This war caused not only military changes, but also social and cultural changes. People felt the devastating effects of the war for many years. The world entered a period of great change with the aim of establishing a new order after the war. Chernobyl nuclear disaster. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which occurred on April 26, 1986, is one of the most catastrophic nuclear accidents in history. It took place at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat, in northern Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union. A sudden power drop during a safety test led to a massive explosion in reactor number 4, releasing large amounts of radioactive particles into the atmosphere. The explosion and subsequent fire spread radioactive material across much of Europe. Immediate effects were devastating. 2 plant workers died on the night of the explosion, and over the next few weeks, 29 emergency responders and plant workers succumbed to acute radiation sickness. Thousands of people were exposed to high levels of radiation, leading to a surge in cancer cases and genetic disorders in the affected areas. Pripyat, a city of around 49,000 people, was evacuated 36 hours after the explosion, but the radioactive cloud had already spread across Europe. It wasn't until years later that the true extent of the contamination was fully realized, with the area around the plant, known as the Chernobyl exclusion zone, remaining off-limits for human habitation due to high radiation levels. The disaster was a result of both human error and a flawed reactor design. The plant was conducting a test to simulate a power outage, but a series of mistakes led to a catastrophic meltdown. The reactor's graphite moderator caught fire, which caused the explosion. Furthermore, the Soviet government was initially slow to report the scale of the disaster, leading to widespread misinformation and a delayed response. In the aftermath, more than 350,000 people were displaced from the contaminated areas, and the long-term effects of radiation exposure continue to affect the health of people living in and around the exclusion zone. A large portion of the plant workers and first responders who dealt with the initial fallout died prematurely due to radiation-related illnesses. Chernobyl had far-reaching effects on the nuclear power industry, leading to reform in nuclear safety regulations worldwide. It significantly shifted public perception of nuclear energy, with many countries reducing or abandoning their nuclear power programs. The tragedy also led to major political consequences within the Soviet Union, contributing to its eventual collapse a few years later. Today, the Chernobyl exclusion zone remains one of the most heavily contaminated places in the world, but it has also become a site for scientific research and has even drawn visitors despite the dangers. The disaster continues to serve as a reminder of the risks associated with nuclear energy and the importance of safety in high-risk industries. 9/11 terror attacks, 2001. The world was shaken by a series of coordinated terrorist attacks carried out by the extremist group Al-Qaeda. That morning, 4 commercial airliners were hijacked by 19 terrorists. 2 of these planes were deliberately crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City, causing both buildings to collapse within hours. The 3rd plane struck the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., while the 4th, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers attempted to overpower the hijackers. The attacks killed nearly 3,000 people from over 90 countries, making it the deadliest terrorist act in world history. The destruction of the World Trade Center, symbolizing the economic power of the United States, was a powerful blow to the nation. The impact of the attacks was felt not only in the U.S. but across the globe, as the event triggered massive political, social, and security changes. In the wake of 9/11, the United States, with the support of its allies, launched the War on Terror, which led to military interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq. The attacks also resulted in significant changes to global security policies, including stricter airport security measures, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and a heightened focus on combating terrorism worldwide. 9/11 remains a pivotal moment in modern history, marking a shift in global relations, the fight against terrorism, and how the world approaches security. The legacy of 9/11 continues to influence policies, cultures, and the global balance of power. The Great Depression, 1929. The Great Depression began in 1929 and lasted through much of the 1930s, becoming the most severe and prolonged economic crisis in modern history. The Depression was triggered by the stock market crash of October 1929, when stock prices suddenly plummeted, causing panic and the collapse of major financial institutions. This event marked the beginning of a global economic downturn that affected not just the United States but countries around the world. The effects of the Great Depression were widespread. Unemployment rates skyrocketed, with millions of people losing their jobs. Many businesses failed, and banks collapsed due to massive loan defaults. Industrial production fell sharply, and global trade came to a near halt. People lost their savings, and the poverty rate soared as families struggled to survive. The Dust Bowl, a series of severe droughts in the U.S., exacerbated the crisis, particularly in the Midwest, displacing thousands of people. The Great Depression led to significant social and political changes. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, a series of programs aimed at providing relief, creating jobs, and stimulating economic recovery. Worldwide, the Depression led to political instability and contributed to the rise of totalitarian regimes, such as those in Germany and Italy, where economic hardship played a key role in the rise of Nazi and fascist movements. The Great Depression had lasting effects on the global economy, reshaping both economic policies and social structures. While the Depression officially ended with the onset of World War II, the lessons learned during this time continue to influence economic strategies and public policy to this day. HIV/AIDS epidemic. The HIV/AIDS epidemic is one of the most significant global health crises in modern history. The human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, attacks the immune system, making it difficult for the body to fight off infections. Over time, if left untreated, HIV can lead to acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS, a condition where the immune system becomes severely weakened. The epidemic began in the early 1980s, with the first known cases emerging in the United States. Initially, the virus was largely misunderstood, and its spread was often associated with high-risk behaviors. As the epidemic spread globally, it quickly became clear that HIV/AIDS was not just confined to one group, but rather a pandemic affecting millions across the world. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the virus claimed the lives of millions of people, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where the epidemic reached its highest concentration. The stigma surrounding HIV/AIDS led to widespread fear, discrimination, and social exclusion of those infected. Public health efforts, however, eventually helped raise awareness, reduce transmission, and encourage safer practices. Since the 1990s, medical advancements have led to the development of antiretroviral therapy, ART, which, though not a cure, has allowed many individuals with HIV to live long, healthy lives. Today, with early detection and treatment, HIV/AIDS can be managed effectively, though challenges remain, particularly in resource-limited regions where access to healthcare is still an issue. The HIV/AIDS epidemic has profoundly changed public health policies, social attitudes, and global efforts in disease prevention, and continues to shape how the world responds to global health crises. World War I. World War I, also known as the Great War, was one of the deadliest and most transformative conflicts in history. It began in 1914 and lasted until 1918, involving many of the world's great powers. The war was primarily fought in Europe, but it spread to colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The war was triggered by a complex web of alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and militarism. The immediate cause was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. This event set off a chain reaction, with major powers entering the conflict due to their obligations to their allies. The Allied powers, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and later the United States, fought against the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. The war was characterized by trench warfare, where soldiers faced horrific conditions, including mud, disease, and constant bombardment. Battles such as the Battle of the Somme and Verdun resulted in millions of casualties. The war also saw the first use of chemical weapons, tanks, and airplanes in combat, marking a significant technological shift in warfare. The war ended in November 1918 with the signing of the armistice, but the political and social impacts were profound. The war caused the collapse of empires, including the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German empires. The Treaty of Versailles officially ended the conflict, placing heavy reparations on Germany and redrawing the map of Europe. World War I reshaped global politics and society, leading to the rise of new powers, the emergence of communism in Russia, and sowing the seeds for World War II. The war's legacy continues to shape the world today. Black Plague. Plague, also known as the bubonic plague, was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. It swept through Europe, Asia, and North Africa in the 14th century, killing an estimated 25 to 30 million people, which was about a third of Europe's population at the time. The disease was caused by the Yersinia pestis bacterium, which was carried by fleas that infested rats. The plague spread quickly through trade routes, with ships and merchants carrying the infected fleas to new regions. Italy, France, and England were hit hardest, with entire villages and cities decimated by the disease. The symptoms of the plague were horrific. Victims developed painful, swollen lymph nodes, buboes, fever, chills, and often blackened skin from the gangrene, which led to its nickname, Black Death. The plague was highly contagious, spreading rapidly through human contact and contaminated air. Infected individuals could die within 2 to 7 days of showing symptoms. The social, economic, and psychological impacts of the plague were profound. Fear and panic spread as people tried to flee the cities, leading to the abandonment of homes and communities. Entire families perished, and with the loss of such a significant portion of the workforce, economies and agriculture struggled. The plague also fueled widespread superstition and scapegoating, with groups such as the Jewish communities being blamed and persecuted in some regions. Although the plague eventually subsided, it returned in several waves over the next few centuries. The Kara Viba profoundly impacted European society, leading to changes in the feudal system, labor shortages, and the development of modern medicine. It also reshaped religious thought, as many people questioned the role of God in such a devastating event. The Black Plague remains one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, serving as a reminder of the vulnerability of populations to infectious diseases and the importance of public health systems in combating such threats. Spanish flu. February 1918. Spanish flu was one of the deadliest pandemics in history, infecting about 1/3 of the world's population and causing an estimated 50 to 100 million deaths. The flu pandemic lasted from 1918 to 1919 and spread rapidly across the globe, devastating populations during and after World War I. The virus responsible for the Spanish flu was an H1N1 influenza A virus, which is thought to have originated in birds and later adapted to infect humans. Despite its name, the flu did not originate in Spain. Spain, being neutral in the war, had fewer wartime censorships and thus reported the virus more openly, leading to the misconception that it came from there. Unlike most flu viruses, the Spanish flu had an unusually high mortality rate among young, healthy adults between the ages of 20 to 40, which was not typical for influenza strains, which usually affect the very young and elderly. The virus caused severe respiratory symptoms, often leading to pneumonia and fluid buildup in the lungs, which ultimately led to suffocation. Some victims even died within 24 hours of showing symptoms. The pandemic spread through soldiers returning from the front lines of World War I and through crowded conditions in cities. Social distancing, mask wearing, and quarantines were some of the measures taken by governments, though their efforts were often too little and too late. The global transportation networks, which were also expanding rapidly during the war, facilitated the quick spread of the virus. The 1918 flu pandemic had profound impacts on societies. It overwhelmed healthcare systems, which were already stretched thin by the ongoing war. The loss of millions of workers led to economic disruption, and the disease's spread caused widespread panic and fear. People had to adapt to unprecedented levels of grief, loss, and social distancing. In the aftermath of the pandemic, medical research focused on developing more effective vaccines and better methods for controlling the spread of infectious diseases. The Spanish flu also marked a turning point in public health measures, laying the foundation for modern flu surveillance and global health initiatives. Although the 1918 Spanish flu was eventually brought under control, its impact on the world was profound, reshaping public health practices and leaving a lasting legacy in global pandemic preparedness. 2011 Japan earthquake and tsunamis. Tsunamis. March 11, 2011 was a turning point in Japan. A massive 9.0 magnitude earthquake hit the Tohoku region, deeply shaking Japan. The earthquake found its epicenter in Sendai, the city of Japan's affluence, and was immediately followed by massive tsunami waves. However, the tsunami waves affected about 500 kilometers along the coast, causing great destruction. The earthquake was so powerful that buildings, bridges, and roads were destroyed, and about 20,000 people lost their lives. The collapsed structures were not only homes and businesses, hospitals, schools, and infrastructure were severely damaged. Hundreds of thousands of people were left homeless, and thousands of families were lost. The Japanese government sent aid and rescue teams to the area a few hours after the disaster, but it was very difficult to recover from the huge waves and massive destruction. Information about the tsunami indicates that the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant was the scene of a major disaster. The earthquake damaged the power plant's electrical system and its cooling systems were tripped. This caused serious meltdowns in 3 lives and caused emissions to leak. The Fukushima disaster has sparked new discussions on nuclear safety and impacts not only in Japan but also around the world. Approximately 160,000 people were evacuated after the disaster and the area was declared a non-safe area. This led to Fukushima combining years of cleanup and reconstruction. After this disaster, the Japanese people were notable for their strong solidarity and rapid recovery. The government launched a massive aid and reconstruction process for the survivors of the disaster. International aid is reaching critical points after the earthquake and tsunami. At the same time, Japan's disaster preparedness capacity has been significantly strengthened. The Fukushima disaster has caused serious changes in nuclear energy and environmental safety worldwide. Years after this disaster, Japan is still in the process of reconstruction. While the entire world was facing this situation, the resilience and social awareness shown by the Japanese, despite all the disasters, became a great source of inspiration.